This week we are beginning a new series called We Are, and this won't be your typical sermon series. We've been working on this as a whole staff for a number of months, and we want this to be a really significant time for us in our church and in the history of our church. So for the next 5 weeks, Dave and I are going to be talking about this idea of who we are as a church family and what it means to be a member of Southeast Christian Church. We're going to be talking about core beliefs, but you'll notice the title is not We Believe, right? Because being a member of this church, being a follower of Christ is not just saying we believe, but it's who we are. It's what we are committed to. And so after we preach about these core beliefs and these core commitments, then we're going to ask each of you to say, okay, I'm in. I'm ready to become a part of this church family. I'm ready to become a member of Southeast. And so here's how we're going to do this. At the end of the 5 weeks, we're going to completely purge the membership. In other words, there are going to be no members of Southeast Christian Church for that period of time. And if somebody comes up and says, hey, how many members are there at Southeast? You can say 0. There are 0 members. Because we're not going to have any members for that moment. And instead, we're going to ask everyone to say, okay, I'm in. Now, for some of you, that means you're going to be re-upping. You're going to be recommitting. You can think of it as a vow renewal ceremony. You might be married to your spouse for 25 years, and then on your 25-year anniversary, you recommit yourself. You renew your vows. For some of you, that's what it'll be like. For others of you who are not a member, I hope this is a great opportunity. You've been attending for a while. You've been learning more about Jesus, learning more about this church. I hope you'll take advantage of this opportunity to jump in with both feet and say, okay, I'm ready to be a part of this. I know that there are some of you who have been coming for a long time. Like you've been coming so long, you just consider yourself a member. Like there's no common law membership here. It doesn't work that way. Like even if you've been coming every week for a long time, we still want to ask you to make that commitment, to step over that line so we know, okay, who's in this with us? Who's part of our church family? There's a number of reasons that we want to do this. But mostly, we want to make a commitment and we want to take it seriously. The general practice for churches is often not to ever take anyone off the membership roll, right? Like you can go to a church, 200 people, and you ask how many members are here, and there's 87,000 members, right? Because they've been in existence for 200 years and no one's ever been taken off the membership. And so what we want to do is we want to say, okay, this is a significant commitment. This isn't just something that is decided on the spur of the moment and doesn't mean anything. And so we're going to be talking about that in this series. And during this series, there are thousands of you who are meeting in hundreds of homes all across the region to unpack this a little bit more and to apply it. One of the things that we're really hoping will come out of this initiative is that we'll get a better understanding of who are the Southeast Christian Church family members that live near us, that live around us, and we can be more intentional in making those connections with each other, and then together we can pray about, we can dream about, okay, how does God want to use us to love where we are and to make a difference right where we're at? So one of the things I recognize in this series that's important, it's important in understanding who we are, it's, I think, important to understand who we are not. We just tend to come with a lot of preconceptions, a lot of ideas about church. Oftentimes unintentionally, just things we've heard. One of the most common things that Dave and I hear when people tell us their story about coming to Southeast or becoming a part of our church family, oftentimes the story will begin with, well, I promised myself I was never going to go to church here, right? Because they'd never been, they'd never experienced it. They didn't really know anyone from this church, but they just had heard some things. They just had some ideas in mind. And someone had called it Six Flags over Jesus. And I never really understood that insult. Like it's Six Flags and Jesus. Thank you. Those are like two of my favorite things. It's like saying, hey, it's like going to Disneyland with your best friend. You don't want to do that. It's great, but all these ideas that we have, sometimes from childhood about what it means to be a member of a church, or maybe you grew up living next door to a person who's a member of some church, and you thought, well, if that's what it means to go to church, if that's what it means to be a member of a church, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And so I think it's important that we clarify who we are not. And so as we get into this, just a few statements about that. First, we are not a country club. All right, just to be clear, we're not a country club. If you become a member of a country club, you pay your dues, you meet certain qualifications, and after you pay your dues and you meet those qualifications, then that country club provides you benefits. And so if you're a member, you get benefits that non-members don't get. And the country club exists to keep the members happy and comfortable. You pay your dues, you get the benefits. We are not that. We are not a country club. Secondly, we are not a warehouse club. Right? Like, this is not Sam's or Costco. I know that if I looked in many of your wallets this morning, that many of you would be members of like a Sam's or a Costco. And why do you do that? Why do you join a warehouse club like that? It's because you want access to their products, right? You want to be able to shop and get what they have. And we're not that. We're not a business that provides products, and if you become a member, then you have access to the products. When you become a member of Sam's Club, you don't join Sam's Club because you want to make a difference with your life. You join Sam's Club because you want to buy gummy bears in 5-pound bags the way God intended. And as a church, it's not about just offering products and now you can access them, right? So thirdly, we are not, seems obvious enough, but we are not a fitness club. Right? This is not, when we say membership, we don't mean like a gym membership. It doesn't work like that. I think most of us, or at least a lot of us, at some point or another have joined a fitness club because we made a spur-of-the-moment decision that we were going to get in shape. And so we go out and we get a gym membership. And we go for a few weeks, we're excited about it for a few weeks, and then we continue for some reason to pay our membership fees, and we continue to have a membership at the gym, but we don't actually go. It doesn't actually have any impact on our lives. Now, we're still members. We still tell people, I'm a member at the gym down the road. We feel better about ourselves because we're a member of the gym, but it doesn't have any day-to-day implications. So that's not who we are, where you join, you become a member, and then, hey, I'm good, I'm a member. It doesn't really mean anything to me day-to-day. It doesn't require anything of me from this point going forward, but yeah, I'm a member. That's not what we're talking about. Instead, when we use the word membership, we're using that to help us understand what it means to be committed to the church as described in Scripture. And so when the Bible talks about being a part of the church, in Scripture, it describes being a part of, first, a family. So when we say member, we're talking about being a member of the family. You'll hear that language used in the New Testament, the church as a household of God. 1 Timothy 3:15 says, God's family is the church of the living God. And so when we say membership, we're talking about family. Now, depending on, what's going on in your life right now, or maybe the home you grew up in, this may or may not feel like a positive thing. And, some of you, when you hear family, you don't think, that's awesome. You think, it's crazy. And if you type in, I tried this, if you go to Google and you just type in dysfunctional, or you don't even have to type in dysfunctional, just type in DYS, and it just guesses you're going to say dysfunctional family, right? That's the first thing that pops up. And so there's dysfunction in family, there's craziness in family, and we've got dysfunction and we have craziness around here sometimes. Everyone in this room is imperfect. It's the one thing we have in common, and yet we also want it to mean something to be a part of this family where you know you're not going to be alone. You know you're going to be encouraged when you need to be encouraged. You know you're going to be challenged when you need to be challenged. My family members, my biological family members, are some of my biggest encouragers. A few moments ago, I got a text from my wife, just an encouraging text, telling me she was praying for me and with a little scripture verse, and that's not uncommon. She knows when I need to be encouraged, and she drops me a note and encourages me. If I'm feeling a little bit discouraged, I know that my parents, I know that my sisters are going to be there to say something positive, to encourage me. But I also know those are the same people that are going to tell me the truth, right? They'll tell me what they think I need to hear, even if I don't want to hear it. So they'll encourage me, but they'll also be there to challenge me. Last weekend, I preached here at Southeast, and for those of you who were not here, don't remember, here's a picture of me preaching last weekend. And so after I got done preaching, I got a text from my dad, and after he saw it online, and here's Here's my dad's texting me. Son, note to self, burn, donate, destroy, or otherwise obliterate all purple, maroon, mauve, lavender, lilac, puce, plum, pomegranate, or periwinkle colored pants in your wardrobe. Love, Dad, right? Now, I don't plan on taking his advice when it comes to fashion, so don't get too excited. But he knows that's okay. He knows he can do that. He's going to encourage me, but at the same time, if he thinks the pants I'm wearing are a mistake, he's going to tell me, hey, those pants are a mistake. And that's what family does. A family encourages, but family also challenges. They'll speak truth to us, even if it's not what we want to hear. The Bible also describes being a part of a church community or a body of believers as being a member of a physical body. That's the analogy that's used. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 12 and in Ephesians 1, that we make up many parts of one body. We're going to talk more about both of those concepts, being a member of a family, being a member of a body, in the upcoming weeks. So this week, the title of this message is we are followers and Jesus is the head. That we are the body, but Jesus is the head, as Paul says in Ephesians 1. Jesus is the leader, we're the followers. Jesus is the shepherd, we are the sheep. That's who we are. And so when you become a member of Southeast Christian Church, that's what you are committing yourself to, that Jesus leads and that we follow. So if you study the word follow in the New Testament, one of the things that you'll discover is that Christians in the New Testament primarily were not called Christians. That's not how they were identified. It's not how they identified themselves. Now, there's a few places where they're called Christians, but typically they were called that name by the outsiders who meant it as a derogatory term. Instead, the people who were a part of the first church were called followers of the way. Followers of the way. And the word follower is an important word because it implies an ongoing commitment, a decision that has daily implications, that you are on a journey, you're on a path. The Bible describes it as a path that is narrow and it's not frequently traveled. In other words, it's not just this one decision where you say, okay, I made that decision, so that's me. Instead, it's this ongoing commitment. If I said, I'm a vegetarian, which I'm not. But if I said I'm a vegetarian and you said, well, I see you eat meat all the time. And I said, well, that's because I made a decision 15 years ago to become a vegetarian. But I've eaten meat ever since. But I did make that decision. Well, that doesn't really add up. It's not consistent. It's hypocritical is the word we would use. And so when we say follower, we're not just saying, okay, I've made a decision, but we're saying this is a commitment that gives direction to my life, that I'm following Jesus on the way, along the way. And it's an important distinction because oftentimes we can make the word Christian mean a lot of different things. Someone can say, well, I'm a Christian. What they really mean is my grandparents were Christians. It's kind of my heritage. I know I'm not Muslim or Hindu or an atheist, so I guess that's me too. I guess I'm a Christian. So follower implies a different level of commitment, a decision that has daily implications. So Jesus unpacks this for us in Luke 14, if you want to turn to Luke 14, and he helps us understand what kind of commitment that he is looking for. In Luke 14, we read that large crowds were following Jesus. So what's that mean, large crowds? Well, it's this, right? That there is a large group of people. It's just a large group, specifically, if you look up that word, it's of unidentified people, meaning they don't necessarily know each other, all of them really well. Some of them know some of the others, but it's just kind of a large group of people. And the Bible talks about this large group of people as those who are traveling with Jesus. Now, here's what you'll find in the New Testament, in the Gospels, that Jesus, from time to time, will try to find out who's traveling with him and who's following after him. That there's a distinction that gets made where there's a large group of people traveling with him and he wants to know who's following me and who's just traveling with me. And to be clear, the travelers were welcome, right? Some of you are travelers, some of you are new here, you're learning more about Jesus, you're getting to know him. And that's great. You can keep traveling. You can keep traveling with Jesus, learning a little bit more about him. But the time comes, well, he'll challenge you to not just travel, but to follow after. And so that's what happens. This is one of those moments in Luke 14, verse 25 and 26. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone If there's any person who would want to come to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Well, that will thin the crowd out, right? I mean, that's one way to figure out who's traveling with you and who's following after you. If you want to come after me, you got to hate your family. Doesn't seem like a great membership recruitment approach. And if the local gym wants to get new members, that's not the type of language they want to use. You put up billboards and you send out ads and you make it clear to people all the ways this is going to benefit them. You try to sell them. You try to sell them on it. Jesus isn't doing that. So why does he use this language of hating your family? Well, I mean, obviously, to take that literally would contradict the other core teachings of Jesus and of Scripture. One translation translates that as, you must love me more than, which is probably a more accurate way to understand the point Jesus is making, but I don't want to take away from his statement. In fact, I think to understand it, you have to understand that in that first century world, a decision to follow Jesus would have been considered, oftentimes, would have been considered by the family as a complete turning away, as a walking away from them. And so, our first instinct is to just interpret this as kind of a hyperbolic language where he's saying you must hate your father and mother because he's trying to make a point. But understand that for the people in that time to make a decision to follow Jesus, it would have been considered by their family this way. A college student caught me after church between the services, 9, 11, 15 service here on Sunday morning, and she told me that she had decided to put her trust in Jesus and that she wanted to be baptized. I said, that's awesome. Let's get you set up. And in the next week or two, we'll get you scheduled to be baptized. She said, no, I want to be baptized today. I want to be baptized before I leave. I said, oh, okay, we can do that. That's great. And so I had some time to baptize her and a few others. And as we were waiting to come out into the baptistry, I could tell she was nervous, and I wanted to encourage her, give her a little confidence. And so I said what I often say. I said, hey, do you have some people who are going to be out here in the service? They're going to be cheering you on? And she said, no. And then she said, my parents honestly are not going to be happy about this. And then I watched as she walked up the steps and into the baptistry to be baptized. And I understand that for some of you, that is a decision that you're making. And I think, for those of us who sit and we watch the baptisms take place week after week, we need to remember that this isn't as unusual as you think. That there are people who feel very much alone, but they know they're called to follow Jesus. And so when we see people baptized, I know there's a tendency for it to become routine as we watch it and we give our polite little clap. Can we not do that? Can we cheer for them? Can we make a stronger statement of support for them? Can we let them know that we are in their corner, cheering them on? All of heaven celebrates. Can we do that? Can we celebrate as well? Because oftentimes people are making decisions to follow Jesus, and it's really costing them something. And a lot of you know that because that's been your story. And I've talked to folks who've been cut out of a will because they made a decision to follow Jesus. They've been cut off from the family. Some of you have made a decision to follow Jesus, and your dad did not approve of it. He rolled his eyes, and he mumbled something about how you get carried away, and your siblings aren't sure what to make of it, and you can feel that they've distanced themselves from you. A boyfriend or a girlfriend has broken up with you, or friends that you thought were with you every step of the way, they don't have much to do with you anymore. A spouse criticizes you when you thought they would be supportive of you. And oftentimes when people come to me and they kind of tell me about this scenario or this situation where following Jesus is going to cost them this relationship, they're wanting to know, well, what can I do so that won't happen? And how do I make everybody happy here? And, what can I do so it's easy, a little more comfortable, a little less awkward? And to be honest, oftentimes the answer is you're just going to have to decide. You're going to have to decide what you want and who you want to please. And that's why the church family is so important. We need that support from each other. I love what John Piper says. He puts it this way. He says, the bloodline of Jesus is thicker, deeper, stronger than the bloodline of race, ethnicity, and family. And we want that to be true. We want that to describe what happens within a church family. That we don't just come in here and we sit down and nobody really knows if we're here, nobody knows if we're not, but that there's a different level of commitment to one another. Well, when Jesus says this to the crowd, and he calls for this level of commitment, you can almost hear some of the people in the crowd getting pretty uncomfortable, starting to ask questions. I mean, why would Jesus say that? Why would he make such a statement? I mean, doesn't he want more people to travel with him? As a rabbi, doesn't it help him if there's bigger crowds? I mean, why would he say something like this? And Jesus explains in verse 28, he says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. And so Jesus says, look, this is only fair. I mean, is it only fair that you sit down and you understand here's what the costs are? I mean, here's what's going to be required of you. If you just go out and you start to build a tower and you really have no idea what you're committing yourself to, is it really a good decision to commit yourself to that? I mean, isn't it better to first sit down and to understand, okay, here's what I'm signing up for? That's one of the reasons we're taking these 5 weeks to do this as a church family. Now, we want you to become a part of a church family, but we want you to know what you're signing up for. We want you to know what it means, and we want it to be a significant decision. Increasingly, of course, we have watched in the news just some of the persecution of Christians taking place around the world. An example of what churches deal with, I was reading about in South Asia where persecution of Christians is common. The church planters, the pastors there, have decided that one of the ways they're going to help people, they're going to talk to people about becoming a member of their church, is by asking them a series of questions so that they know what they're signing up for. It's only fair, right? It's only fair. And so they've come up with a series of questions that they ask new members or prospective members before they become a part of the church. And here are the questions that are asked. Are you willing to leave your home and lose the blessing of your family? Are you willing to lose your job? Are you willing to forgive those who persecute you and share the love of Christ with them? Are you willing to give an offering for the Lord? Are you willing to be beaten rather than deny your faith? Are you willing to go to prison? Are you willing to die for Jesus? Those are the questions. So you still want to sign up? They just want to be fair. They want to be honest and say, look, this is what it could cost you. And as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we want to understand that following Jesus, it may cost you something. Now, you may never be put in a situation like this, but it may cost you. It will cost you something. I think this past week we were heartbroken when we heard of the news of the shootings in Oregon, and several witnesses have said the shooter came into at least one classroom and specifically asked the Christians to stand up to identify themselves, and he targeted the Christians. And in many ways, there will be those moments, maybe not so dramatic, but moments where you have to stand up and identify yourself and say, yeah, I am a follower of Jesus, and it may cost you something. Now, if you're like me, when you hear stories like that, when you read the challenge like this in Luke 14, there's part of you, if you're like me, that thinks, well, I do want to do this. I do want to follow Jesus, but I don't have that, right? Like, I don't think I'm going to ever measure up. I'm not going to be strong enough or faithful enough or good enough. But look, having it all together is not a prerequisite for following Jesus. A few years ago, a middle-aged man who had been coming to church for a little while, a business guy, asked me, he said, hey, what are the way he worded it, what are the qualifications to becoming a member of this church? I said, help me understand what you mean by that question. I think the word qualifications was throwing me off. And he said, what are the prerequisites to becoming a member? How do I get qualified? And we talked a little bit more about what it means to be a member of a church family, but as I was driving home, I was thinking about his question. I'm like, well, if I just answered that question literally, what's the first prerequisite to becoming a part of this church family? First prerequisite is that you're a sinner, and you know it. Right? The first qualification to becoming a part of this church is that you acknowledge that you're not qualified. That's where it begins. That you're not good enough and you're not strong enough. And that's what we have in common. That's what is necessary to follow Jesus, is to recognize our need for him. And so that's why you have somebody like Matthew, a tax collector, who follows Jesus. And he makes the commitment to follow Jesus, but he still has a long way to go after he decides. And so to become a follower of Jesus, to become a member of this church, it's not about, okay, I'll get my life together, I'll figure everything out, get my paperwork in order, and then I'll become a member. No. We don't say change and then you can join us. We say join us, start following Jesus, and together he will change us. What's required of us is a submitted and surrendered and repentant spirit that says, Jesus, I'm not there yet, but what you want is what I want. Your way is the way that I'm going to follow. It's a narrow path. It might be a difficult path at times, but that's the road that I'm committed to. So Jesus is the head of the family, and we are the followers. That's what the Bible describes in Ephesians 1, that we are the body. If you think about that analogy, if Jesus is the head and the church is the body, in the physical body, what's the role here? Where the head directs the rest of the body, right? The head accomplishes and acts through the body. So that when you see a quarter on the ground and you need to pick up the quarter, the head gives directions and tells you to bend over and tells you to extend your arm and to open up your thumb and index finger and bring them together around the quarter. And that's the head giving directions to the body. The head is acting through the body. This is the way that God has designed it for the church to work, so that as followers of Jesus, we need to be committed to a body. John Stott talks about what he calls the grotesque anomaly of an unchurched Christian. The grotesque anomaly, or another phrase that's used is the amputated saints. Here's the idea, is that we are all, as Christians, we're all meant to be members of a body. When we are Christians without a church body, it's just this grotesque anomaly. It's that there's this random finger that's not connected to any body. It's an ear that's just off by itself, but it's not connected to any body. It's a grotesque anomaly. It's not the way that Scripture teaches that we are to follow Jesus. That following Jesus means that we are a part of a church family. We would go so far as to say that, yes, we would love you to become a part of our church family, but when you reach a point where you're ready to follow Jesus and commit yourself to following Christ, to go from traveler to follower, then you need to become a part of a church family, and it's okay if it's not this church family. We would love to have you, but we would rather see you connect to a church that is Bible-believing, that is Christ-centered, than just continue to attend here randomly and to be this grotesque anomaly, just a body part that's not connected to a body. That's what we want to be committed to as followers of Jesus, that we understand that we need each other. I have a friend who's been a part of this church for many years, and before I had a chance to meet her, I received an email from her, and I was struck by what a good communicator she was in her writing. She was just very clear, she was just bright, she was funny, and it just came across in her email and how she wrote. What I didn't realize until I met her is that she has cerebral palsy. And if you know someone with cerebral palsy, there can be different levels of how those outward signs surface, but A lot of times there can be floppy or erratic arm movements, inarticulate speech, a bobbing head. It can be hard to listen and understand what's being said. And that was true. As I talked to her, she was so patient with me, and she's kind of known for her joy, and she kept a smile on her face as I was trying to understand her, and she was trying to communicate with me, and I thought about how frustrating it might be, or it must be, to have a brilliant mind, but have a body that just doesn't obey what the mind says. And then I thought about this analogy used in Scripture of Ephesians 1, that Christ is the head and the church is the body, and how frustrating it must be when Jesus as the head has a body that just doesn't follow. And look, we are not a perfect church, and you know that, we know that too. God has a lot of work to do with us as a church body, and we're learning and we're growing. But Jesus is the head. The pastor is not the head, and Dave and I are not the head. When we talk about following Jesus, we don't talk about that as those who've already arrived. Like, hey, yeah, we made it, so here's some directions. You want to turn right and then go. That's not, we're with you on this journey together. We're growing together, but Jesus is the head, and that's what we're committed to as a church. We follow imperfectly, but we follow wholeheartedly. And we want to continue to learn what it means to be the body that submits, surrenders, and is obedient to Jesus as the head.